In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, February 20th, here in South Korea. As pledged, doctors in training here in Seoul are taking collective action and leaving hospitals in protest of government plans to raise medical school admissions quota. Meanwhile, the European Union is exploring its options of fresh sanctions against Russia amid the sudden death of vocal critic Alexei Navalny, whose widow blames Vladimir Putin. And the U.S. shares its draft UN Security Council resolution urging for a brief ceasefire in fighting between Israel and Hamas and opposing a ground offensive into Rafah. Hello and welcome to our afternoon newscast for this Tuesday, February 20th, here in South Korea. Today, we begin with live coverage of the year's 9th cabinet meeting presided over by President Yoon Suk-yeol. Now, this latest meeting comes amid much concern over a potential medical shutdown as doctors in training here in capital Seoul resign en masse in protest of government plans to raise the medical school admissions quota by 2,000 to the 5,000 level, that is, from the current 3,000 level starting next year. That would be 2025. Now, President Yoon is expected to address these concerns and more during today's cabinet meeting. In fact, on the broader health front, is also expected to touch upon the country's low birth rate, which stands at 0.7 based on findings for the year 2022. The birth rate for last year, that is 2023, will be shared this year, but most observers believe the rate will be lower at 0.6. Accordingly, President Yoon will highlight the need for tangible policies to encourage childbirth and to better support child rearing. And within these efforts in support of families are policies for working parents and for education. I understand the cabinet meeting, that is, about to commence, and we cut live to the venue of that meeting now.
At ease, please take your seats. We will begin the cabinet meeting. In protest of the hike in medical school enrollment quota, resident doctors have tendered their resignations en masse, and medical students have taken leave of absence collectively. This is really unfortunate. Until now, the government has met with the doctors' organizations 28 times, explaining the inevitability of medical reform. The government has proposed many things like reducing judicial risks for doctors, strengthening the compensation system by increasing the number of policies for local essential medical care, and supporting investment in local medical institutions. Nevertheless, last week, the en masse resignation letter has been submitted, and as a result, cases where surgeries have been delayed or cancer patients cannot be treated has happened. The lives and health of the Korean people are at stake, and doctors and medical students are the future of healthcare, and they should not take such actions that put the public at risk. Protecting the lives and safety of our citizens is one of the most fundamental constitutional responsibilities of government, and also the actual meaning of the national security and public safety. To this end, the state must manage healthcare resources efficiently to protect the lives and health of our people. Doctors, just like soldiers and police officers, even though they are not public officials, they should not be collectively denying their duty to care and take treatment, treat the patients. The need for healthcare reform has been recognized for a long period of time. In July 2022, a nurse at one of the big 5 hospitals in Seoul collapsed while working and died because no doctors were available to operate on her. The essential health care of the Republic of Korea has been highlighted by this incident. It is in dire situation. We are constantly faced with reality that there has been massive outflow of healthcare workers to non-essential and leaving a huge void in essential care. As such, the healthcare reform is urgently needed, but still, the past governments had not addressed this issue for nearly 30 years. The demand for healthcare is growing at a rapid pace, but supply it cannot keep up the speed of the demand. In particular, the workforce for essential healthcare has shrunk even more, and as a result, the local essential care has collapsed. The local healthcare collapse means that the health and safety of the people living in the local areas is at risk. But still, for the last 27 years, the government has failed to increase the number of medical students schools by a single one. In fact, since 2006, medical school student quota have been reduced, producing a cumulative total of less than 7,000 doctors. And we know that we cannot solve the collapse of essential care problem with this situation. However, it is clear that more doctors are necessary for preventing the collapse of essential health care. The government so far has tried to recruit more doctors many times, but we have repeated failure over the last several decades. Now, we have reached a tipping point where failure can no longer be an option. Some have argued that 2,000 seat increase is too much and that some are raising conspiracy theories. But this is not enough to solve the problem that has been lingering over 30 years and prepare our country for the future. The 2,000 seats itself is literally the minimum. Even if we increase the number of medical school quota from next year, the first medical school graduates will be coming out in 2031, and it will take at least 10 years for specialists to be trained. And it will be 2035 when we are reaching the 2,000 doctors that are needed. Therefore, the hike in medical school enrollment quota can no longer be delayed. The argument that the quality of medical education will fall is also incorrect. Seoul National University's medical school currently has 135 students as quota, but compared to 1983, which is 3 decades ago, it was 260 back then. For the last 4 decades, the demand for medical care has exploded, but the number of medical schools and seats has been cut in half. Some medical schools in the region, like Gyeongbuk National University and Jeonnam National University, Busan National University, the situation is also similar. On the contrary, the skills and competence made Korean healthcare one of the best in the world. And the shortage of doctors trained when enrollment was higher. The government will not be reluctant to invest in more medical education whenever it is necessary. Moreover, the expansion of medical schools is a key component to complete regional essential healthcare system. The government will continue to push for healthcare reform that saves the lives of the people living in the regions. And we are going to disseminate the best cases of regional hospitals so that the concentration to Seoul area would be disseminated evenly to the regions. And in Korea, we have the best medical capabilities, which are the best in the world. And we are going to let this be known by everyone in the future. Nevertheless, the reality of healthcare services that the patients and Korean people face in their regional areas is very disappointing, to say the least. The people of healthcare realm, I ask you to join us in reforming the medical health care so that it can no longer be delayed. We will reward local essential and critical care and reduce judicial risk so that you can practice with confidence. Moreover, wherever you're living around the country, you can be treated appropriately so that the fair access to health care for the patients will be guaranteed. Expanding the medical school enrollment quota is also vital to prepare the biomedical scientists and healthcare entrepreneurs for the advanced biohealthcare industry. This is a strategic industry for our nation's future. This is a sector that requires access to clinically experienced physicians and creates tremendous high-paying, high-quality jobs, and it is an important future growth engine for our country. In just a few days, the total fertility rate for 2023 will be announced. The low birth rate of Korea will be in a dire situation, and we will be able to acknowledge this with statistics. The low birth rate problem, we do not have a resolution that will work at once. However, we all know the history has actually shown us that the problem cannot be solved by reactive measures alone. So we have to thoroughly analyze the root cause of the declining birth rate, take a stock at the many policies that is in place and restructure them whenever it's necessary. At the moment, the young people are at an insecure situation in bringing up children, employment, and housing. No policy will be effective unless it is a tangible and palpable one. The government will accelerate structural reforms in labor, education, and other areas to reduce unnecessary competition. We will identify continuously the policies that directly benefit the mothers and fathers and pursue them unwaveringly. We will do our utmost to develop the regional areas in a balanced manner. In order for the government's measure to have a greater impact, it's crucial for the companies, in particular, to join hands. Recently, there were many policies by private sectors and companies that they are putting efforts to overcome the declining birth rate, and I'm very grateful and pleased to know so. It is very encouraging to see people in our society to come together to solve these societal challenges. The government will not just sit idly. We will quickly put in place various support measures, including tax incentives, to future revitalize corporate efforts. Last week, I appointed the new vice chairman of the Low Birth Rate and Aging Society Committee, and I hope this committee will serve as a control tower for the declining birth rate. This vice chairman will be implemented as a regular committee member, and the protocol for this person will be also escalated, and that person will be able to join this cabinet meeting in the future. Each ministries are encouraged to discuss this birth rate fall issue in detail and promptly implement policies in this regard. Since last week, we have been holding the public discussions with the people on livelihood. After the Lunar New Year holiday, I went to Busan and announced the 3 packages for the local era so that we can have more policies, and we discussed about the concrete measures to open a local era that could be palpable by the people. On Friday last week, I went to Daejeon to explain how to foster talented human resources and innovative research institutes to make Korea the first mover in advanced science and technology. We also discussed the future of Daejeon, which is the science capital of Korea. When I go to the field, I learn the things that you don't know from your office, and you can see for yourself what are the challenges. And I know and I realize that there are so many voices that the government needs to listen to. Throughout this year, we will continue to hold such discussion sessions to break down the barriers between the ministries and hold ministerial reports and discussions centered on the issues of the livelihoods. Whenever and wherever I could hear the people's voice firsthand, I will visit that place. I will listen to the voices of the people and meet the people at the field with solutions. We will create policies that respond to the field and quickly change the lives of the people. Together with the cabinet members and the ministry officials, we will go into the fields and deep dive into the fields so that we could solve the problems on the field. It's March almost, and the new semester will begin, and outdoor activities will be on a rise. However, whenever spring comes, the fine dust issue arises, so some people say that it's not always welcomed. In particular, the atmosphere is expected to be stagnant due to El Niño and other weather conditions. From last December, seasonal controls have been placed to reduce the PM emissions from cars and factories, but we need to be prepared more. As the weather warms up and heating demand drops, we would look into the ways to reduce coal-fired power generation further and how to manage dust from construction sites. So from such little parts, we should take our actions and see if we have any room for enhancements. In particular, attention should be paid to indoor dust control. And so that we can and we will be able to make the people more assured that the ministries are taking their actions. Thank you.
As pledged earlier, doctors in training here in capital Seoul have resigned en masse in protest of government plans to raise the medical school admissions quota. For more on the latest developments, my colleague An Sung-jin joins me live now from one of the 5 major hospitals here where doctors have staged a collective departure. So Sung-jin, what is the latest there?
Good afternoon, Sunny. I'm standing in front of Severance Hospital in Sinchon, Seoul, where trainee doctors stage a walkout starting from 6 a.m. this morning. Now, this hospital is one of South Korea's so-called Big 5 hospitals, where more than 20% of the total number of trainee doctors work. These Big 5 hospitals have nearly 3,000 residents, and 1/3 of those residents have submitted their resignations. This hospital in particular saw the most cases of doctors leaving the workplace. These walkouts are in protest of a government policy which aims to increase the quota of medical school admissions by 2,000 places starting next year. Doctors' groups argue that increasing the number of doctors would lead to unnecessary medical care on top of a lack of incentives for doctors to practice in essential areas such as pediatrics and emergency medicine. But health authorities said more doctors are vital to keep up with the country's fast-aging population. The number of doctors in the country relative to the size of the population is reportedly among the lowest in the developed world. As these trainee doctors play a key role in medical processes, at least 25 operations have been canceled and 34 official complaints have been made by patients. As of 11 p.m. yesterday, more than half of other trainee doctors from other major hospitals nationwide, nearly 7,000 residents in all, have submitted their resignation letters as well. Also, more than 1,000 students in medical schools across the country have applied for a leave of absence. The health ministry and medical community says that the temporary system they've put in place could hold up only for 2 or 3 weeks without these key medical personnel. The Korean Medical Association at the emergency meeting, which begun at noon, decided to elect a director for the emergency committee and further discuss responses.
And Sang-jin, how has the government here been responding to the latest collective action by Korea's medical sector?
About 400 emergency medical situations nationwide will be monitored 24 hours a day from the National Medical Center. If the gap due to a lack of necessary doctors remains for a longer period, the government also announced that it will allow non-face-to-face treatment.
There are 12 military hospitals where emergency rooms are operating. We have also decided to open them to civilians.
Now, the government has maintained its position, refusing to accept doctors' demand and denouncing their collective action as intolerable. The Yoon administration has sent a prior notice to key figures such as the chairman of the Emergency Response Committee of the Korean Medical Association regarding the suspension of their doctor's license. The health ministry also just issued a work start order to 831 medical residents. Whether this will be taken as a warning to the medical community will be something to watch out for. That's all I have for you. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Sang-jin, thank you for that coverage. That was our An Sang-jin reporting live from Severance Hospital here in capital Seoul. Moving on to the international front now, the U.S. has shared its own draft for a possible UN Security Council resolution to address the rampant violence in Gaza. It calls for a brief ceasefire in fighting between Israel and Hamas and opposes a ground offensive into Rafah. Our Yoon has more.
On Monday, the United States circulated a proposed UN Security Council resolution that supports a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. The resolution states a temporary ceasefire would be based on the formula of all hostages being released, while also lifting all barriers to provide humanitarian assistance at scale in the Gaza Strip. The draft also warns Israel not to launch a ground offensive in Rafah, stressing that such major military action should not proceed under the current circumstances. This is the second time since October 7th that Washington has proposed a Security Council resolution on Gaza. The first proposal in late October was vetoed by Russia and China. The latest draft comes more than 2 weeks after an initial draft was put forward by Algeria, the current non-permanent Arab member of the Security Council, which demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. That draft resolution was set to be put up for a vote on Tuesday, but U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield signaled it would be vetoed, saying it would jeopardize any negotiation talks to broker a pause in the war and the release of hostages held by Hamas. The U.S. proposal may fall short of the international call for an immediate ceasefire, but the significance stands in Washington's use of the word ceasefire, which Israel is against. While the U.S. has been ready to protect Israel, the latest change in Washington's wording signals a warning shot to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. International Crisis Group UN Director Richard Gowan also said Israel would now be more concerned by the text Washington drafted and that it is the strongest signal the U.S. has sent at the UN so far that Israel cannot rely on American diplomatic protection indefinitely. For a resolution to pass, it needs at least 9 votes in favor and no vetoes by the permanent members, the U.S., France, the UK, Russia, or China. It is not immediately clear when or if the U.S. draft resolution would be put to a vote. Yoon, Arirang News.
The wife of Putin critic Alexei Navalny says Russian President Vladimir Putin is responsible for her husband's death. Now, that's a claim that U.S. President Joe Biden has echoed. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
The widow of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of being responsible for the death of her husband, adding she will continue on with her husband's fight. In an 8-minute video posted on her late husband's social media platforms, Yulia Navalnaya on Monday said the Russian leader killed the father of her children and took away the most precious thing. She further accused Russian authorities of hiding Navalny's body in a move to disguise the cause of his death, adding that they're only waiting for traces of another of Putin's Novichok to disappear, referring to a nerve agent allegedly used by Russia's security service. The EU is now looking into fresh sanctions against Moscow over the death of Putin's critic. Germany, Lithuania, and Sweden were among EU nations calling for specific new penalties against Russia. The discussions came during a meeting of 27 EU foreign ministers scheduled before the death of Navalny, where EU's top diplomat Josep Borrell suggested that Russian prison officials linked to Navalny's death could be added to the list of those subject to asset freezes and travel ban. U.S. President Joe Biden also hinted at new sanctions, while also directly blaming Putin for the death of Navalny.
But the fact of the matter is, Putin is responsible. Whether he ordered it or not, he is responsible for the circumstance to put that man in. And he is a reflection of who he is. And it just cannot be tolerated. I said there'd be a price to pay.
Meanwhile, Russia says an investigation into the death of Navalny is underway, adding that all due actions are being taken. The Kremlin added that any accusation against its president is both rude and gross, as there is no information on the cause of death. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Russia's Vladimir Putin reportedly gave his North Korean counterpart Kim Jong-un a Russian car. Now, North Korea's Noldong Shinmun carried a related article on Tuesday that included a response from Kim's younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, who reportedly claimed the gift was clear indication of the close friendship between the two leaders. Meanwhile, a senior official at South Korea's unification ministry has condemned the gift giving, pointing out that the sending of a luxury car to North Korea violates UN Security Council resolutions. Up next, we bring you the second installment of our one-on-one with the Unification Minister Kim Yong-ho, who touched upon his ministry's recently published study based on the accounts of over 6,000 North Korean defectors that, among other issues, reportedly shows a link between K-dramas and the desire to defect. Our correspondent Kim Jong-sil reports.
While K-dramas have fans around the world, there are also those watching in secret, in hiding in North Korea. Fans in other countries may admire the unique plots, dramatic twists, and of course the actors. But for some people in North Korea, watching K-dramas led them to a decision that could cost them their lives.
The report suggests that more than 83% of North Korean defectors watched South Korean dramas when they were in the North. When they watch South Korean dramas, they can feel that South Korean society is free and wealthy. And the reality of South Korea in these dramas is different from what the North's regime has brainwashed its people to believe.
Stairway to Heaven, My Love from the Star, and Autumn in My Heart, classics for K-drama fans, were among those frequently mentioned.
The number of defectors last year was about 3 times higher than in 2022. It was 196 people, and about half of them were the MZ generation of North Korea in their 20s and 30s. The number proves that K-dramas have a big impact on young people in the North.
The spread of K-dramas actually poses such a threat to the regime that back in 2020, Pyongyang made a stricter law that bans North Koreans from watching it. Those caught spreading K-dramas could now even face the death penalty. With the regime tightening its already tight controls, the actual lives of the residents aren't getting better. The report says 7 out of 10 people said they had not received any food rations from the state since Kim Jong-un became leader. A whopping 38.3% said they have never been to a hospital. And almost no one in North Korea has ever used the internet.
Surely, I think leader Kim Jong-un also knows the suffering of the residents and that if this continues, the regime isn't sustainable, where is he heading with this?
I think if the Kim Jong-un regime doesn't give up on developing nuclear and missile programs, it'll fall into a military dilemma. If the regime keeps spending its resources on nuclear and missile development, the economic hardships within North Korea will get worse. And people's feelings will be against the regime even more.
Can doubt fill the minds of North Korean people? The report says this is already happening and the number of doubters is increasing. 56.3% of the respondents who have recently defected said they feel negative about the succession planning that keeps power within the Kim family.
What's the reason for South Korean government to let the international community know the reality of North Korean residents?
North Korea's poor human rights situation and security issues cannot be separated. So, to bring righteous changes in the North Korean society would help not just its residents, but also help bring peace on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, and for the world.
The minister added that North Korean residents would wish to reunify not with China nor Russia, but with South Korea. And that Seoul will continue to strive for reunification that guarantees peace and freedom. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
On the local front, Democratic Party floor leader Hong Ik-pyo urged for support in the April general election, claiming that his opposition party is the only alternative to address the challenges currently faced by the country. Speaking at the National Assembly earlier on this Tuesday, Hong also claimed the economy was on the brink of collapse. He emphasized that a fair economic system includes collaboration between ruling and opposition parties for responsible policies on housing, healthcare, education, and more. Meanwhile, ruling People Power Party floor leader Yoon Jae-ok is scheduled to deliver his speech tomorrow, that is Wednesday. Consumers here believe inflation will ease in the future. Now, this is according to the Bank of Korea on this Tuesday in a report that showed consumers this month expect to see an inflation rate of 3% over the next year. The forecast remains unchanged on month, but it has been on a decline since hitting a high of 4.7% in July 2022. Bank officials believe the high price of fruits and that of dining out during the Lunar New Year contributed to the latest consumer outlook. In other news, researchers here are using AI technology to create industrial robots capable of responding to spoken or written human commands. Our Gangwon-do explains.
작업대로 이동.
The robot understands the researcher's words and starts moving.
작업 시작.
물체짓기를 시작합니다.
The robot then moves parts to the workstation and starts assembling them. It understands what people say and carries out their orders. A regular robot transforms into a smart robot when a special artificial intelligence developed by South Korean researchers is installed.
Workers unfamiliar with robots can easily use them, which can improve productivity in the manufacturing industry overall.
Commands can be given not only through voice but also through text. Individuals can program the working process in layman's terms depending on the situation without the need for experts. The artificial intelligence can create the optimal working sequence and movements tailored to the site in a virtual space.
We developed automation tech that understands commands, generates performance order and executes them simultaneously, a world first for actual application.
AI technology that can easily create speech understanding robots is currently being tested at an electronic parts factory in Cheongju. If the robot's effectiveness is confirmed, it is expected to enable scenarios where humans and robots collaborate as seen in similar scenes in movies. Gangwon-do, Arirang News.
And on the medical front, a team of experts here has made it possible to treat external injuries without the use of antibiotics. Our Kim Dami tells us how.
Antibiotics treat wounds by restricting the spread of infection, but when used incorrectly, they can in fact be toxic. Antibiotic resistance not only takes away from the effectiveness of treatment, but even leads to a rise in mutations or so-called superbacteria.
Antibiotics don't work on superbacteria, so there is no treatment when infected by them. For elderly or critically ill patients with a weakened immune system, this is fatal.
In order to overcome this problem, a team of Korean researchers has developed a technology where skin wounds can be treated without antibiotics. Based on the meta-organic framework used on industrial sites, the research team has found a way to incorporate zirconium. The shiny silver-gray metal is highly ductile and extremely resistant to corrosion and heat, but its effect when applied to the skin suppresses inflammation and catches elements like active oxygen molecules and immunity proteins that interfere with the wound recovery process. The substance was applied to a wound on a mouse, and the wound healed just in 2 weeks.
It has these proteins called cytokines that reduce inflammation. Extracting these proteins brings the effect of speeding up the healing of wounds.
This substance has high biostability, which means it is safe for use on the human body and is designed to break down and naturally discharge out of the body. The research team says the next step would be to go beyond external wounds on the skin and turn the substance into a pill for the treatment of inflammatory diseases. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. At The Hague, Palestinian representatives on Monday asked the judges at the UN's International Court of Justice to declare Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories illegal. The International Court of Justice began a week of hearings on Monday as a result of the UN General Assembly's 2022 resolution, which called for an advisory, non-binding opinion of the court on the legality of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories since 1967. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki and UN envoy Riyad Mansour said the case may contribute to a two-state solution and a sustainable peace. Al-Maliki, in his speech, argued that Palestinians have suffered from decades of discrimination and apartheid and were left only with a choice of displacement, subjugation, or death. 52 states and 3 organizations, the Arab League, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and Africa Union, will present arguments to the International Court's 15-judge panel until February 26th. In Indonesia, at least 71 election workers have died from exhaustion since the world's largest single-day election was held in Indonesia last week. The chairman of the nation's polling body said Monday that some 4,000 other election workers had taken ill since the February 14th election due to fatigue from helping to run the national event. 5 million paid volunteers worked at some 800,000 polling stations to host the more than 200 million citizens who had registered to cast their votes. While voting lasted for about 6 hours, the post-vote distribution, counting, and reporting of paper ballots, in some cases, lasted over 12 hours. The government had imposed an age cap and mandatory health checks for volunteers after over 500 polling station workers died following the 2019 Indonesian election. In Sudan, a report released on Sunday by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs revealed that some 25 million people, 14 million of them children, require humanitarian assistance due to a violent internal conflict which has passed its 10 months. The civil war between the Rapid Support Forces and Sudanese armed forces has left the population with limited access to medical care. According to the UN's Sudan Situation Report, about 65% of the population lacks access to health care, while up to 80% of hospitals in conflict areas are no longer functional. The report also said diseases such as cholera, measles, malaria, and dengue fever are claiming Sudanese lives. At London Fashion Week, the catwalk took on a literal meaning at the Loving Cats Worldwide's Catstravaganza show. Felines took centre stage at London's Olympia on Sunday, with the UK's most lavish pampered cats carried down the runway by their owners. Stephen Meserve, the the founder of Loving Cats Worldwide, said that while the event took place during London Fashion Week, we have our own catwalk here and our models are way cuter. Catstravaganza shows are also heading to countries including Canada, Colombia and Japan, as well as cities in the US and the UK. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. East of Gangwon-do is on high alert against heavy snowfall, while the rest of the country will see rain. Mountainous regions in Gangwon-do especially are forecast to see 50 centimeters of blizzards into tomorrow, with a heavy snow advisory issued in the area. So please stay safe. Meanwhile, the East Coast could see 20 to 60 millimeters of rain, while Jeju Island could receive up to 80 millimeters of heavy showers. Well, roller coaster temperatures continue in most places. After a much chillier start to the morning, highs rise to 9 degrees in the capital, but those in the south are seeing highs going down nearly 10 degrees lower than yesterday. And it will be colder tomorrow in most parts of Korea. For today, Seoul gets up to 9 degrees, Gwangju topping out at 11 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow looks to be a snowy one for the central regions and the capital area, and it will only get chillier as we head into the end of the week, while Jeju Island will be rainy through Sunday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Do stay with us for our panel session coming up next. Thank you for now.
제주도에 처음에 놀러 갔을 때 새롭게 단장했다고 얘기를 나와봤는데
스트릿 사진 한 장이었는데 혼자서 좋은 건축을
한국인들만의 마음들 같이 갈래요?
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
For the first time in 65 years, South Korea and Cuba have established diplomatic relations, which were severed in 1959 when former leader Fidel Castro seized power during the Cuban Revolution. So what is the significance of this latest diplomatic stride forward? Is Seoul's forging of formal ties with Havana aimed at ruffling Pyongyang's feathers? And are Seoul-Havana ties behind Kim Yo-jong's optimistic tone on Pyongyang-Tokyo ties? Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min San-hee. Now, South Korea has established diplomatic ties with longtime North Korean ally Cuba. And for more on this recent event, I have Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy here in the studio. Professor Kim, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
I also have Mr. Evans Revere at Brookings Institution live on the line. Mr. Revere, it's been a while as well. Welcome back to you too.
It's great to be back with you.
Right, Professor Kim, we'll start here in the studio. Let's begin then with your thoughts regarding the significance of Seoul seeking formal ties with Havana.
I think this is not an overnight outcome. South Korea has begun making efforts to normalize relations with Cuba, maybe sometime around the Kim Dae-jung era. The reason is that after the end of Cold War, South Korea needed to expand its diplomatic arena into international community. And the thing is that we were pretty much weak on the side of the American continent, the South and Middle American continent. So I think Cuba is a very important country for South Korea to enter into the South American countries. That's the first one. And I think another one is that recent South Korean influence in Cuba is very humongous. Hallyu, K-drama, and Korean cell phones are pretty much there in Cuba. There are a lot of good images about South Korea. So maybe Cuba had a very difficult decision because North Korea was always the reason why Cuba was now willing to have its relationship with South Korea. But well, this time I think Cuba needed more needs from South Korea in economic terms and also along with the cultural exchanges.
Right. Mr. Revere, I understand that your first assignment in Washington as a young diplomat was at the Latin American Affairs Bureau. That being said, Mr. Revere, what are your thoughts regarding South Korea's diplomatic engagement with Cuba?
Well, I think this is a very valuable and very positive step for the Republic of Korea. And my colleague has it exactly right. This did not come out of the blue. This is the result of efforts going back decades. As a matter of fact, I was in Seoul working in the U.S. Embassy during President Kim Dae-jung's presidency, and I remember there was some talk about ultimate normalization of relations with Cuba back then. What we've seen, obviously, is more recently, former Foreign Minister Yoon Jong-se met with senior Cuban officials in Havana a few years ago. Former Foreign Minister Park Jin also had meetings with senior Cuban officials, and the result of all that, of course, is a normalization that has been a long time in the making. It brings benefits to Cuba. the possibility of improving the livelihood of the Cuban people. It's no secret that the Cuban economy is a basket case and that the only prominent exports of Cuba are cigars, defectors, and baseball players. So here's an opportunity to work with a first-rate, first-class international economic power and perhaps make the lives of the Cuban people better. And for the Republic of Korea, beyond the cultural element, there is a market for investment and manufacturing and an opportunity to show the Cuban people the benefits of a modern, market-oriented economy.
Right, and amid those prospects, Professor Kim, there are some who claim that South Korea's courting of Cuba is aimed at ruffling North Korea's feathers, metaphorically speaking. What are your thoughts?
Well, North Korea responded right after South Korea announced its normalization with Cuba. I mean, North Korea mentioned that it is pursuing a summit meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida. But South Korea doesn't have sole purpose of isolating North Korea from international community or something. I mean, this, I think, a move is, in a way, in a process of expanding our global diplomatic arena. I mean, the current South Korean government's diplomatic directive is to be geared towards a global pivotal state. Cuba is the 193rd country that South Korea has had a normalization deal amongst the UN membership countries. The only exception is Syria. So I think we'll continue to have another deal with Syria. I hope so. So I think South Korea is now moving and upgrading its positions in the international community towards a regional and global power rather than only focusing on Korean Peninsula. But I don't think North Korea is accepting this as, I think it's accepting this as some threatening move towards its country, I think.
Right, and staying with that, Mr. Revere, what do you believe has been the impact of this advance in diplomacy by South Korea on North Korea? I mean, there are some who believe that North Korea was probably taken aback, to say the least, by this latest development. Do you agree?
No, I don't. I don't think Pyongyang was shocked or surprised at this. They may have been disappointed. They probably were disappointed, but they have certainly seen this coming for quite some time. And I think the North Koreans had probably resigned themselves to the inevitability that the ongoing process of dialogue between Seoul and Havana was ultimately going to result in normalized relations. The North Koreans have reacted in a very quiet fashion. They haven't reacted. I think the Cubans were probably also, since North Korea is a fraternal country, I think the Cubans were quietly keeping the North Koreans advised of what was going on so that there would be no surprises. I think it's very interesting that just a few hours ago, the Cuban president and head of the Cuban Communist Party, as well as the head of their organization department, both on the occasion of the birthday of Kim Jong-il, stressed the importance of the fraternal relations between Cuba and North Korea. So that was a positive signal sent to North Korea by Cuba, but it's also a manifestation of the fact that I think the Cubans have been trying to avoid any surprises and trying to avoid upending, if you will, their long-standing decent relations with North Korea.
Right, I see. Also, Mr. Revere, as Professor Kim here in the studio mentioned, a day after Seoul's forging of diplomatic ties with Havana, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong floated prospects of a possible advance in ties with neighboring Japan. Do you believe such an advance is possible, especially keeping in mind the conflict between Japan and North Korea with regard to the issue of abductions of Japanese nationals by North Korean agents back in the 1970s and 80s?
I think the signals from North Korea regarding the possibility of talks with Japan, that issue has been on a separate track for some time now. There have been lots of murmurings and rumblings about the possibility of Tokyo-Pyongyang dialogue over the last several months or so. And I noted with great interest that Tokyo has not denied any of these rumors. Having said that, it's really hard for me to imagine North Korea being willing or able to take the sort of major steps on the abduction issue that would satisfy Tokyo. For Japan, the abduction issue remains a highly emotional one. It's extremely politically important for the Japanese government, and that's why Prime Minister Kishida has made it, as his predecessors did for many decades, an extremely high priority. I think it's also, a reflection of the fact that the Prime Minister in Tokyo sees this as a possible way to bolster his low public support. And I think the North Koreans are very canny when it comes to their understanding of the Japanese, and they probably understand the Prime Minister's political weakness, and they see this as perhaps an opportunity to reach out to the Japanese to see if there are any potential benefits that might flow to them. And I also think on the part of the North Koreans, it's a way to try to complicate the ongoing U.S.-Japan ROK coordination against North Korea that we're seeing.
Right, and staying with the same issue, Professor Kim, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, he has been quite vocal, as Mr. Revere has mentioned, about his will to meet with his North Korean counterpart Kim Jong-un. Now, according to Japanese media reports, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida may travel to Seoul next month to address related matters. Do you suppose such efforts on the part of Japan could serve to perhaps create a fresh momentum for constructive communication on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I think it's not easy, as Evans mentioned, it's not easy for North Korea to satisfy Japanese positions about the abductee issues. And also mentioning about the possible summit meeting between Japan and North Korea, North Korea mentioned a few days ago that, they don't want to damage anything related to the nuclear issues and abductee issues. I mean, those two issues should not be the ones that kind of damages North Korea's position. That's something that I don't think Japan can easily accept, even though Kishida wants to have some meeting for some domestic political reasons. Of course, I think the U.S. position is that, it is only focusing pretty much on China issues. If any allies, including Japan and South Korea, can have some sort of talks with North Korea and manage the situation in the Korean Peninsula, that would be good for the United States. But the question is, as I have mentioned, would two countries' agenda setting will satisfy both countries? And that's not that easy for now.
Right. Mr. Revere, President Yoon Suk-yeol, for his part, has also spoken about the possibility of a summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, provided that a bottom-up approach is adopted. Now, where do you stand on the debate, Mr. Revere, with regard to a bottom-up strategy or a top-down approach?
Well, quite frankly, I don't stand in support of either one of those, not because I wouldn't want one approach or the other approach to take place eventually, but the reality is that there doesn't seem to be any possibility now for either a top-down or a bottom-up approach to go anywhere with North Korea. North Korea has, in effect, written off its ties with the Republic of Korea, with the current government in Seoul. I think the North Koreans have made a strategic decision to move away from engagement and reconciliation with Seoul. And I don't see Pyongyang as being interested in any of the incentives that Seoul might offer, either at the top end or at the bottom end, to get North Korea back to the table. If you look at the overall situation from Pyongyang's perspective right now, Pyongyang, I think, feels fairly confident about where it stands. It has arguably the best relationship with Russia that it's ever had. It has a solid relationship with China, especially as the Chinese are trying to retain their influence in Pyongyang. The North Koreans have two permanent members of the UN Security Council who are prepared to support and defend and protect North Korea. The North Koreans have found ways, creative ways, to earn income by stealing money through the international banking system. Last and hardly least, North Korea has acquired nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them, and they're not going to give them up. And so they see themselves as in a pretty good position here. And from the North Korean perspective, perhaps they don't see any need to have that better relationship with Seoul that we all hope that they would have.
Right. Professor Kim, while Mr. Revere feels quite hesitant with regard to a top-down or bottom-up strategy, under a former Trump administration, the U.S. opted for a top-down approach with regard to North Korea-related affairs. Do you envision a similar strategy should Mr. Donald Trump return to the White House? And if that is the case, what are the broader implications of such an initiative, especially considering the current climate of geopolitical conditions?
Yes, I think if Trump comes in, he will definitely try to have some sort of negotiations with Kim Jong-un because he thinks that, deal making and transactional, outcome is something that he can, achieve in his diplomatic policy. As far as North Korea U.S. deal is concerned, I think the drive will be made by Trump himself. I think he will try to approach and coast Kim Jong-un himself by top-down approach. But things afterwards, I think definitely something that's related to the policy-related process is something that needs to be followed. But this is something that concerns a lot. I mean, whether it's top down or bottom up, what concerns the South Korean people now is that possible talks between North Korea and the United States at the stage of North Korea full-fledgedly develop all the nuclear weapons might give wrong signal to South Korean people that now U.S. is accepting North Korea as a nuclear state. And that's something we have to be ready. We need closer talks between U.S. and South Korea rather than U.S. and North Korea.
And Mr. Revere, speaking within your capacity as a former government official, do you envision a radical shift in U.S. diplomacy under a possible Trump administration? And if that is the case, how should South Korea seek to ensure regional stability amid North Korea's rampant threats?
I think Professor Kim has it right. There's always the possibility that a second Trump administration might see President Trump moving in the direction of the sort of performance art diplomacy that we saw with the North Koreans. I think that that Donald Trump sees this as an opportunity to promote himself and his image more than an actual opportunity to resolve the problem. And that's exactly how things turned out with his earlier bromance with Kim Jong-un. It was largely a performance art piece, if you will, and produced virtually nothing. I also think that the collapse that we saw of dialogue in Hanoi, though, should have made very clear to Donald Trump and anybody who would serve in his administration that the North Koreans are simply not going to give the United States government what it wants vis-a-vis nuclear weapons and denuclearization. And so that's the baggage that they will have going into this. My bigger concern right now is not so much what will happen on North Korea, but what will happen between the United States and its major alliance partners. That's the thing that troubles me right now. The recent statements by Donald Trump about NATO, the revelations by General Kelly and John Bolton about the contempt that Donald Trump had for allies and alliances. That is really troubling to me right now, and that's the major issue, I think, that we need to be concerned about, and that the United States and the ROK and Japan and our NATO allies need to be preparing ourselves for right now.
Right, indeed. That is a concern shared by quite a number of pundits here as well. Moving forward, Professor Kim, President Yoon Suk-yeol recently postponed a trip to Germany and Denmark. Now, some critics claim that this was a diplomatic faux pas. Very briefly speaking, what are your thoughts, speaking within your capacity as a scholar?
I think, more important for any leaders is domestic political issues rather than foreign policy issues. I mean, you know, many outcomes and achievements in diplomacy and foreign policy is because he wants to consolidate his power domestically. It's really hectic now, indeed, in South Korea domestically. I mean, the medical student numbers expansion issues, that's something that is troubling between the government and the medical associations, doctors association in South Korea. You know, North Korea is continuing its provocations. That's something we need to talk more and more amongst the countries like Japan and the United States. And also economic issues, and we have election, congressman, National Assemblyman election coming soon. So I think it's now better and more appropriate for President Yoon Suk-yeol to focus more on domestic issues rather than foreign policy issues. It's a very important summit meetings with Germany and Denmark. It's a state visit. But I think he made a good choice, right choice. I mean, he should focus more on domestic issues and then he can visit later on.
Right, I see. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition. Professor Kim, as always, thanks so much for your time and your thoughts. And Mr. Revere, over in Spain, thank you very much for your insights.
You're welcome.
Right, well, on that note, we end Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.